Hi everybody, my name's Renee Claassen. I'm the Unit Coordinator for INT 102 and I will be supporting your lecturer for the next few weeks until end of trimester, I guess, by providing you with the lecture and obviously information and so forth, but all your questions and activities can be referred to your lecturer at your tutorial time. So I encourage you while you're listening to this to make notes, to write down questions that you might want to ask your lecturer at tutorial, and also to respond to the activities that come up as maybe part of your response to a Moodle question or something that you outline when you're in your tutorial with your lecturer. Okay, so this is week 8 and we're going to go ahead and start. So, actually before I do, let me just make myself a bit smaller there. I think that's about as big as you need to see me. Alright, so welcome to week 8. Week 8 we are covering conflict management skills. So conflict management is the management of issues which arise both in life and in the workplace, but obviously for the purposes of INT 102 we're mainly going to be talking about issues which may arise in the workplace and how we could go about managing them. Now, conflict management in the workplace, it's a big deal, it's a buzzword, a lot of people talk about it, and a lot of organisations have training for it. It's that important. And there's a show called The Office, and on The Office they did have conflict management training, and then this happened.
Okay, so this is the disputed poster. Now, one at a time, I want you to express your feelings using I emotion language and no judging or you statements.
I got this poster for Christmas, and I feel I want to see it every day. It makes me feel like the babies are the true artists, and God has a really cute sense of humor.
Come on, seriously, that? I don't like looking at it. It's creepy and in bad taste, and it's just offensive to me. It makes me think of the horrible, frigid stage mothers who forced the babies into it. It's kitsch. It's the opposite of art. It destroys art. It destroys souls. This is so much more offensive to me than hardcore porno.
Okay, stop. Let's see if we can't just brainstorm and find some creative alternatives that are win-win.
Win.
Yes, thank you, Pam. How about Angela makes the poster into a t-shirt which Oscar wears. That way he can never see it, and whenever she looks at Oscar, she can see it. Win, win, win.
No.
No.
Okay, well, brainstorm. Own the solution.
How about I leave it up?
How about she takes it down?
How about Angela can keep it up on Tuesdays and Thursdays?
Okay, that is called a compromise, and it is style 3, and it is not ideal. To sum up, win-win, make the poster in a t-shirt. Win-lose, take the poster down. Compromise, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the answer is make the poster into a t-shirt. Win-win.
Win.
Fine.
But
It is done.
Okay, so that's an example of using some of the styles that we're going to talk about, but it's obviously not ideal because in the end, there were still people unhappy, and I guess that that is a good video to illustrate how you can learn conflict management skills, but it's certainly all about how you enact them and how they play out in the work scenario. So here's an activity for you to reflect on in your tutorial. How do you feel about disagreeing with someone? Is it something that you personally enjoy doing? I don't think anybody does, but is it something that you personally can do without feeling that maybe you have to get aggressive, or without feeling embarrassed or that you don't want to do it? What about presenting a point of view that's different to a popular view? I've spoken to a lot of students, and at their workplaces, when they have a disagreement with the boss, for example, they do not bring it up for fear of, being sacked or being, let go, because their point of view is different and might be seen as inappropriate, or it might be seen as bad manners to have a point of view, or it might just be seen as you're acting inappropriately as a subordinate. So what about saying no to a request? Can you say no? Can you stand up and advocate for yourself, or do you tend to be the sort of person who says yes? What about discussing an emotionally charged topic? So maybe this relates maybe to a relationship. Do you tend to passively accept? Do you tend to come forward with your opinion? Have a think about that. I think it's really important for you to be self-aware, to be aware of who you are as a person within the context of a conflict situation. So conflict, here's a definition. Conflict is a defining feature of communication and refers to any situation in which there are incompatible goals, cognitions or emotions within or between individuals or groups that lead to opposition or antagonistic interaction. So a big long description, and we can just break it down a little bit. Conflict is a defining feature of communication. We accept that conflict is normal. It's not something that we don't do. In fact, you'll see in the rest of the lecture, it is encouraged in a certain way. It's actually very productive. So we know that it's a feature of communication, but it is a situation in which there are incompatible goals. So obviously I want what I want, you want what you want. They're incompatible. Cognitions are our thought processes, so the way that we think, the things that we believe, our value systems, they may, come into conflict with other people's, similar systems and beliefs. And also our emotions. We often get triggered in different ways. We often express different emotions as a result of different situations, and that again can lead to conflict. So to follow on from that, conflict is a form of interaction between parties who differ in interests, perceptions, goals, values, and approaches to problems. Conflicts can occur in public or in private life. They can occur or may involve, individuals or groups. They can involve disagreements, struggles, disputes, quarrels, actual physical fighting and wars. They're all associated with conflict at various levels. And such communicative interactions are not only difficult, they are also potentially unpleasant. Conflict is not a pleasant experience for many people. And of course, different people react differently depending on, sort of their personality type. So you've got people who are more than willing to be assertive, more than willing to enter into a conflict just to get their point of view across. They don't feel apprehensive about it. Then there are other people who are extremely apprehensive. They suffer internal conflict because they keep their own opinions inside. They don't want to, have that encounter, have that conflict with someone else. And so we say here, because each individual is unique, possessing a variety of physical, intellectual, emotional, economic, and social differences, conflict is inevitable. So what are some of the things that cause conflict? And we know all of these. I think it's worth outlining though. Conflict, while communicating, can involve disagreement about provision and understanding of information, reasons for decisions, and supervisory feedback. And that is a classic basis of conflict in a workplace. I just recently came out of a meeting in which there were a few of us involved, and one of our bosses was involved as well. And one gentleman said, he's a worker and his boss is present, our boss, same boss. He said, look, I'm sorry, I disagree. That's going to affect me, in this and this way. And he gave a full account of how and why the situation as it stood was not going to be good for him. And that's pretty much what it was. He didn't like the way the information had been brought across, and he disagreed with it. And so this happens a lot. This happens a lot in workplaces. Excuse me. There are differences in values, attitudes, ideas and principles, differences in ideas and the way we organise things, miscommunications or misunderstandings. A classic miscommunication or misunderstanding happens all the time between friends. One person says, let's get the car and go to the shops. Let's say, you're with your partner and the partner says, no, we can walk this, it's just down the street. And the other one says, no, I mean the one, over there in the other suburb. Oh, you didn't say so. Sorry about my acting there, but that's just a classic miscommunication, and it can happen anytime. Different perceptions on values or of certain procedures, priorities and importance of tasks, not understanding expectations. Those last three, the different perceptions, the priorities and importance of tasks, and not understanding expectations, that is very important sources of conflict within the workplace. When management or team leaders have certain expectations or certain requirements which are not conveyed, that can lead to conflict, and often does. So what about the way that we approach our client or our colleague or our boss? When we approach someone with the right attitude, so we are open, we are non-judgmental, we are congruent. You remember the factors involved in person-centered approaches. What about when we don't do that? How does that contribute to the conflict? So the first question is here, how could being judgmental affect communication during conflict? It seems pretty obvious that if you're going to be judgmental, the other person will become defensive. They may close down, so that may trigger them to not respond, and then you really can't get the problem out in the open, or it may cause them to be quite defensive and aggressive. So I think judgment, obviously is going to exacerbate that conflict in some way. What about that second question? How could an understanding of your blocks and barriers to listening assist communication during conflict? Well, we've covered blocks and barriers to listening, haven't we? We know barriers and blocks anywhere from being distracted by mobiles to having your own personal worry that means that you are distracted from conversations. What communication barriers such as a disability. How can knowing those things about yourself help you? Well, obviously, once you're aware of yourself, you can make those adjustments. You can learn how to be a better listener or how to not get so distracted and so forth. So obviously, having self-understanding is going to lead to better communication, which will lead to better results in conflict. And how could feelings of insecurity affect communication during conflict? Well, that person who, instead of speaking up for themselves, feels that they can't because they really don't have a voice. They're afraid, they're insecure about the situation or the outcome, or they feel insecure about themselves. They may then experience internal conflict. So the communication suffers a breakdown because they don't say anything, maybe they feel insecure, and so internally the conflict continues. So, have a think about those and perhaps answer them in your tutorial or discuss them. So, conflict, as we've already noted, is normal. It's just a part of everyday life and communication. But in traditional views, it was believed that conflict was bad, and it was always bad and something which should be avoided at all costs. It was considered that conflict comes as a result of poor communication, a lack of openness and trust, and the failure of management to respond to employees' needs. And for conflict to cease, the dysfunctional behaviour needed to be stopped at the source. So here what's happened is they've decided, or they've viewed conflict as being emanating from a particular person or a source, as it says there. It needs to be stopped at the source. It's not seen as something which can be handled, which can be managed. It used to be seen as something which just needed to be avoided. And I think a lot of cultures still believe that conflict is a sign of, poor management. But the traditional Western view now is the human relations view, and that came in from 1940 onwards. And it involves conflict as being viewed as a natural and inevitable part of group interaction and relationships, and that conflict can be functional and dysfunctional. So here's a little bit more about the human relations view. So human relations view takes a view of conflict that is dichotomous. It has both a positive element and a negative element. And so in its positive context, in its positive way, it can be very, very effective. And when it's not, it can be very, it can cause dysfunction amongst staff, for example. So let's have a look now at what positive conflict involves. So it's a functional element and supports and benefits the organisation or the main objective. It leads to increased involvement, increased cohesion, increased innovation and creativity, positive personal growth and change. Values are clarified and ultimately leads to clarification of key issues. So thinking now back to my meeting there with the boss and the guy who kind of said the things that he needed to say, he did actually say them in a way that then created some positive conflict, because he wanted his values clarified. He wanted clarification on key issues, and he was fortunate that our boss was also willing to interact in that way. So through listening and being non-judgmental, there was a resolution, and it led to a very good meeting and ultimately some very good outcomes. On the other side, negative conflict is dysfunctional, and it hinders the organisation or person's performance or ability to attain goals. So with negative conflict, you often see heightened emotionality. People are not in self-awareness. They kind of don't realise that the things that they're saying are affecting the other person's emotionally, but they also don't realise how big their own emotions are getting in relation to the problem. There's personality clashes, decreased communication results, there's lowered self-esteem and confidence, and an overall decrease in efficiency. And so going back to my meeting, if that gentleman who did speak up had spoken up, but in a way that was heightened emotionally, that, played out a personality clash, sort of creating a tension between the boss and himself, sort of setting themselves up as being different, and that's why there was an issue. This could have led to a decrease in communication and obviously, a lowered sense of safety within the group, so lowered sort of self-esteem and confidence, and an overall decrease in efficiency. So that's an example there to illustrate how, the conflict can work out quite positively. And so we consider that conflict is actually normal. And that is an interactionist view. It's the contemporary view. It means that we feel that through resolving conflict, we actually achieve better outcomes rather than denying it, pushing it away, sort of ignoring it, or claiming that it's bad and therefore there is a problem, not with the conflict but with the person who initiated it. So with this view, we say that conflict is actually inevitable and can be positive. It's a positive force for change. A degree of tension can be helpful in keeping a group energized and creative, and that without conflict we become static and non-responsive. You often find that good groups, good workplaces include people from all sorts of different walks of life and with all sorts of different experiences, because those experiences and those perspectives provide good sources of discussion. Now, sometimes that can lead to conflict, but if you're using this point of view, you know that the conflict is normal and just needs to be resolved. Functional conflict improves long-term group performance. It can stimulate creativity and innovation and encourages interest and curiosity among group members. So I'm not sure whether you would have heard of this, but there are these teams called boards. So they sit as kind of above an organisation, and they're kind of the people who think about how the organisation's going, help to grow the organisation and help to meet its goals and ensure its success. And in a board, we have team members, board members, and generally a very good board will include people with all sorts of different experiences. So I sit on that kind of board for a small disability organisation, and I talk about the mental health point of view. And they welcome that because it does stimulate, as it says there, creativity and innovation. I will say, things to the effect of, yes, but how are we communicating that, bearing in mind that, there are people with certain barriers, and then it means that they have to become more creative about how they then go about disseminating information. So, diversity is part of what leads to conflict, yes, but it is considered very positive because it, as it says there, stimulates that creativity and encourages, different points of view. And finally, the challenge is to find constructive means for managing conflict while still maintaining some differences that energise the group forward, while encouraging group leaders to maintain an ongoing optimum level of conflict. It is essential to keep the group viable, self-critical and creative. And I think that that's what we do. Thinking now about, the board that I sit on, is that everybody brings these different opinions and backgrounds, but because we're all striving for the same goal, which is, as it says there, to maintain viability of the organisation and ourselves, we're all prepared to resolve and work on the conflict. So what happens when you're in a situation and there is conflict and your response is, causes you some anxiety? And quite often conflict can. And we know that we as humans, we're designed not for conflict. We actually are not. We're actually very sensitive. But we do have a response center within us, and it's in our brain, and it's called the amygdala. And that response center is the fight, flight, or freeze response center. And the way we can describe it is that the amygdala is our reptilian brain. So we have evolved with it since Neanderthal times. We were initially we had initially devolved purely to survive. So we were out there, imagine Neolithic man walking down, some track that he had created, and in front of him comes a big tiger. Now, that tiger presents danger, clear and present danger. We have an immediate response to it, which is either to fight, to flee, or to freeze. And depending on that response, we're going to survive. Obviously, the people who were able to survive, they lived on to see another day and went on to evolve another part of the brain which enables choice and decision making. But really that reptilian part, that initial part of our brain, was really just there for survival purposes. So, would you fight the tiger? Would you flee from it? Or would you freeze? You may have your own ideas on what you would do, but whichever one you did, it had to lead to survival. And that was a really important decision that your body spontaneously made. It actually wasn't a decision, it was a response. It was an important response. And so we automatically make that response. But what we have here is that people can react to conflict in the same way. It's not a big tiger, it's not a big bear, it's not a survival instinct, but we treated it as though it was, because we still do function at that level on some, level, on some level. When we experience conflict, we may be triggered to fight, flee, or freeze. And we may feel threatened, as it says there in point number 1. When we feel threatened, our bodies unconsciously trigger a fight or flight response or freeze response, and we have limited control over this response once it has been triggered. So you can see there in the picture, the cat's response is to hiss and arch its back, and I'm pretty sure that cat's going to run. And the dog's response when it sees the cat is to chase or to fight. We have a little fight, flight, and freeze response video now to illustrate.
Take a very close look at this statue. Pay attention and don't look away. Did you just jump back? Did your muscles tense? If so, that's because your brain comes equipped with a primal fight or flight response to danger. And it's rare that your brain can override it, even at times when danger isn't really present, like in this unique experiment we've designed to test fight or flight responses. We brought in a team of makeup artists to transform our actor into an inanimate statue outside Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas. And then we set up cameras to see what happens when our statue suddenly comes to life. This should make a nice souvenir vacation picture, but watch out for the photobomb. They weren't the only ones to react. Watch what happens to this curious cat. These ladies picked the wrong bench to take a break from shopping. Notice how most people are responding with the flight part of fight or flight. Person after person jumped back in fright. The thing is, they're not actually making a decision to flee or fight. It happens instinctively. So what do you think will happen when we scare someone whose instinct is to fight rather than flee? Is someone about to knock our statue's block off?
Right. So that's a really good illustration of seeing fight and flight in action. And it seems to me that most people are flight oriented. So in a work situation, let's have a look at this cartoon. You've got a woman pointing at a guy who's pointing back, and here your co-worker has accused you of stealing her ideas. So some of the responses might be to say something back, so you advocate for yourself. It's your immediate response is to give her a piece of your mind. To flee or flight, to physically leave the area. You let her say what she has to say, you maybe nod and just walk off. Don't give that person the energy or the space to say those sort of things to you. Or you freeze, you don't say anything, and you hope the person will leave. Which one are you most likely to do? The Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode questionnaire is on your Moodle, and we would like you to download it and complete it as part of your tutorial activity, and find out what is your natural tendency of responding. Please answer these questions. If you get an opportunity to answer all of them, that would be great, or one or two would also be good. Do you remove yourself from conflict as quickly as you can? Are you a flight type of person? Do you avoid conflict at all costs by remaining silent and saying nothing? So you would be a freeze type. Do you retaliate and fight to win? Do you defend the attacked person? Those last two are the fight type people. They're willing to get involved. It is a natural response that you developed over time. It may be because of the family that you come from, it may be innate, it may be the culture that you come from, but these are responses and you need to become aware of them. So hopefully you can have a conversation maybe with your lecturer about that. So conflict and the fight, flight, freeze response. So even though the natural physiological response to stress is to fight, flight or freeze, we can learn to control our responses. Think about anger management classes. Think about people who go to anger management classes. Obviously, they have a very strong, uncontrolled sort of fight response. And they go to these classes and they can learn how to slow down and how to actually make a choice before enacting, that or allowing that response to get them into trouble. So we have here at dot point 1, to stop the activation of fight, flight or freeze, we need to actually get our minds to kick in and to remember that we are not actually in danger. So what this is saying is that the first step, to stop yourself from having that response is to recognize that it's not necessary. You're not in danger. This is just a conversation. This is just a situation. This is something that if you apply reasoning or logic to, or you just slow down and respond to thoughtfully, it doesn't have to end up in a conflict situation. Now, I think a lot of people don't realize that. And so the first step is to recognize this is not danger. So once you recognize that, your fight, flight, freeze response will not be activated. And then we train ourselves. So by training the parts of our brains that are responsible for executive function, we can override the urge to respond instinctively and replace it with a more cooperative approach. So what is the executive function of your brain? So that is the part of your brain, it's in the frontal lobe there, that makes decisions. It's the one that can make lists. It takes you from A to B. It's the part of your brain that likes things to be ordered and coordinated. Now, when you use your amygdala, you kind of bypass that. You're kind of just responding. So imagine if instead of using that part of you, you were always prepared to think it out. Use your executive function. And so one of the things that it suggests here at point number 3 that you can do is breathing. So you might say to yourself, well, what's breathing got to do with it? I breathe and I still end up in conflict. But what we mean here is a particular type of breath, and that is a breath that slows you down. So, in the moment between becoming angered or having a response that you're not happy with, if you take a breath and slow down, you can then engage your executive function. So perhaps your breath might be a reset breath. So we breathe in for 4, hold for 2 and out for 6. I'm actually going to do it. So that is an instantly resetting breath, depending on how how eager you are to respond. You might have to take a couple of those breaths or do a couple of cycles in order to have a more engaged and a more considered response. And so what it says here is that good old breathing, you can do it any time, any place, anywhere. It's the most amazing thing for calming us down. So first of all, we need to realize we're not in a situation of life or death. We don't have to run away from a bear until we do, in which case run or hide or whatever you're going to do. But the conflict situation is in the workplace is generally one which just requires you to take a breath and then apply your executive function to it. Now, there are people whose executive functions don't work very well. People with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, they have an executive function often that they're not in full control of, and so they lose concentration, or they're not able to engage it, and they can take medication for that sort of thing. That's something that these sort of people with ADHD can do in order to be able to not have as much conflict. Notably, people with ADHD do engage in a lot of conflict, and that is one of the reasons why, by the by. Presumably, you all have intact executive function, so the breathing technique hopefully will work for you. So the outcomes of conflict depend on how the conflict is managed and resolved, and we've just discussed that. Yes, everybody has a fight, flight, or freeze response, but we can take a breath, take a moment, realize we're not in survival mode, and we can manage and resolve the conflict. It's not the conflict itself. Conflict itself does not cause difficulty. It is the management of conflict that produces negative or positive results. And we need to pause and avoid automatic reactions and decide on the best way to manage the conflict. And when deciding on a strategy for dealing with a specific conflict, two factors need to be kept in mind. Your goals, so how badly you want, this thing that you want. Imagine, or let's think back to my meeting with that gentleman who started to talk to my boss. Now, he really wanted to get his point of view across. So there could have been, there were a couple of ways that he could have done it. So let's take him as an example. What needs to be accomplished? He needed to get his point across. And number two, the importance of the relationship is also to be considered. So the depth, the quality, and the duration of the relationship. So in conflict management strategies, we think about those 2 points, number 1 and 2, which we just discussed, as being, running along scales that intersect. So here on the left, we have the assertiveness, or the importance of achieving that goal. And that can range from very low all the way to extremely important. If I don't tell you this, I'm going to bust. It's life and death, so to speak, or extremely important at any rate. And on the other scale, we have cooperativeness, so the importance of maintaining or enhancing the relationship, and that can go from low, I don't really care what you think of me, I don't really care about our relationship, I'm just going to tell you what I want to tell you, all the way to I really care, it's extremely important that we maintain or enhance our relationship. And so we can see then that a low level of both of these leads us to the first quadrant. So low care about the relationship and low importance of goal. You know what, I really don't care whether I get what I want, or I really don't care about our relationship. I mean, I'm not even going to talk about it. It's not something that's even going to come up, so I'm going to avoid it. Okay? Now if we go up a little bit, where am I? If we go up a little bit towards the top of the importance of achieving that goal, we're into a whole different territory. Now it's really important that you hear what I have to say, or that I am allowed to express myself. And so this area here, coupled with a very low importance of relationship, would lead to some form of competition, for example, or some form of interaction in which pretty much your feelings, if you're the one that I'm competing with, your feelings are not taken into account. I really just want you to do what I want you to do. Sometimes that happens in a work situation, and it's not ideal at all. So if we go to the other end here, we find that the relationship is extremely important, and also the point of view is extremely important. So we're going across here. So both elements are important, and that leads to something fantastic, which is called collaboration, in which, because of the importance of our relationship, and because of the importance of the issue, we decide that something needs to be done collaboratively to work on, on the conflict or the issue. And that's kind of what happens in those board meetings I talked to you about. And that's actually what happened in this meeting, where the gentleman spoke up and the boss listened, and there was a collaboration, and it resulted in very good outcomes for all of us, in fact. So the middle one there is compromise, in which really we try to, accommodate a lot more. We sort of avoid going fully into the conflict. There is some element of competition, but we're prepared to collaborate. It's kind of like a mishmash of all of them. And as he said in the video, it's not ideal. So there's more outline of each of the strategies. So avoiding, choosing not to deal with the issues or people involved, hoping it'll go away, but most often it resurfaces because it's not dealt with. We know that accommodating is smoothing, and priority is given there to the relationship. As you can see down here, the importance is high for the relationship. Compromising, in the middle, we discussed there, we give up part of the goal and part of the relationship to reach agreement, and there's win some and lose some, so nobody's really getting what they want. Competing, I win, you lose, we talked about that. We force our goal at all costs, and we sacrifice the relationship. And finally, collaboration, or collaborating, it says there, where we integrate. There is a win-win, win-win-win. As I said on the video, it requires commitment, strategy, excellent communication, problem solving, and negotiation skills. And believe me, that is not easy. You need a very skilled communicator to engage in collaboration. They need to be willing to hear things that they don't necessarily want to hear. And if it's you, you need to be willing to listen. You need to be willing to problem solve. And how do we do that? We learn how to manage ourselves, and we learn that through learning how to collaborate. And I guess that, those sort of, that sort of training, like that little, which had happened in that little video I showed you, that's what that was about. It was about having had this sort of training. So some things to be considered when you're deciding which way to go. There are costs and benefit to every situation that we make in life. You can see there that in competition, you're going to win at any cost. You're going to put yourself forward, and the loss is that, the relationship is diminished. Whereas on the other end, collaboration, we're all attempting to have a win. We're trying to become very creative. Collaboration engages creativity and a sense of contribution from everybody, not just some people getting what they want and some people not getting what they want. And you can see there in the losses of collaborating, there really is only one, and that is that it's time consuming. And it requires a lot of energy because you've got to get creative. But I think you can see it's the one to go for. So we recognise there is conflict in the workplace, and so we ask ourselves, how do we prevent the dysfunctional, workplace from arising? I'm going to stop it there because I have another video which I've recorded.